Once upon a time, in the bustling pre-Netflix and chill days of early 20th century Boston, there was a man named Charles Ponzi. Now, Charles wasn't your run-of-the-mill Italian immigrant. No, he had dreams, big dreams. He wasn't just thinking about building a life in America. He was thinking about building a life, then putting that life inside a golden box, and then putting that box inside another golden box, and then maybe sprinkling it with diamonds. He had ambition in the way that only a man with absolutely no understanding of consequences could have. The story begins, like all good financial crime stories do, with the United States Postal Service. That's right, our hero, Ponzi, discovered a totally normal, not at all sinister thing called the International Reply Coupon, IRC. For most people, an IRC was just a little piece of paper that helped you send mail internationally. To Ponzi, however, it was a ticket to untold riches. An IRC was like a magical postal coupon that could be bought for cheap in Europe. And, here's the genius part, traded in the US for a 5-cent stamp. Now, 5 cents may not sound like much, but back in 1919, 5 cents could buy you a loaf of bread, or a gallon of milk, or even half a gallon of prohibition-approved water. Big money, folks. Ponzi's light bulb moment came when he realized that he could buy these IRCs in Europe, where the economy was more broken than a piñata after a children's birthday party, and sell them in the US for a profit. "It's foolproof," he probably exclaimed to no one in particular, while gleefully rubbing his hands together like a cartoon villain. But Ponzi wasn't just thinking about making a little money. No, he was going to buy all the coupons, become coupon king of the world, TM. Soon have so much money he'd be diving into it like Scrooge McDuck in his money bin. He wasn't in this to make a couple bucks. He was in this to print money faster than the US Mint. Naturally, being Ponzi, he immediately thought, why stop at being a legitimate businessman when I could be a legend? So, instead of actually buying a few IRCs and maybe setting up a nice little trading business, Ponzi went for the financial version of go big or go home. He launched the Securities Exchange Company, which is a super fancy way of saying, give me your money, and trust me, it'll work out. And people, being the optimists they were in those days before Twitter, were into it. Ponzi told everyone he had secret agents all over Europe buying IRCs in bulk like it was Black Friday, and he promised investors a 50% return in just 90 days. That's right, 50% in 3 months. For reference, these days, you're lucky if your savings account gives you enough interest to buy a gumball in 3 months. But Ponzi was promising to turn people into millionaires by breakfast. Here's where things started to get really wild. People didn't just like the idea. They loved it. They fell over themselves to give Ponzi money. It was like Boston had collectively lost its mind and was throwing cash at Ponzi faster than they could say compound interest. People were cashing in their life savings, selling their grandmother's antique silverware, and mortgaging their houses just to get in on Ponzi's magic money train. He was raking in $250,000 a day. And remember, this was 1920. Back then, $250,000 could buy you a small country, or at least a yacht, the size of your average Rhode Island. Of course, the real genius of Ponzi's scheme was that he wasn't actually doing anything with the money, except, keeping it. It was a beautiful cycle. New investors would give Ponzi their cash, and he'd use that cash to pay off the earlier investors, who, naturally, were thrilled and told all their friends about this wonderful, 100% totally not suspicious financial wizard. "This guy is the real deal," they'd shout, and then those friends would invest. Ponzi would take their money, pay off the previous investors, and so on and so on. It was basically like throwing a huge party and pretending there was pizza. But instead of pizza, you just served people slices of pizza-shaped air. Somehow everyone thought they were eating pizza, and nobody noticed they were just chewing on nothing. But Ponzi couldn't help himself. He was living the high life. He was buying fancy houses, wearing expensive suits, and, for some reason, probably had the world's fanciest collection of pocket watches. He was basically living like Jay Gatsby, if Gatsby's fortune had been built on lies and postage stamps instead of bootlegging and green lights. Everything was going great, except for one tiny little detail. Ponzi never actually bought many IRCs. In fact, at the height of his empire, Ponzi owned a grand total of, drumroll please, $61 worth of postal coupons. That's right, 61 bucks. The man was running a multi-million-dollar empire on what was basically a postage stamp budget. Eventually, as you might expect, people started to get suspicious. Some folks in the government were like, hey, wait a minute. How exactly is this guy making so much money off of postage? That doesn't sound right. And Ponzi, realizing that his house of postal cards was about to come crashing down, probably started sweating through his very expensive suits. Soon, the Boston Post got wind of Ponzi's suspiciously massive profits and launched an investigation. Cue dramatic music. After some digging, authorities discovered that Ponzi's entire operation was, in fact, built on the delicate, fragile wings of other people's hopes and dreams. The audit found that Ponzi had, quite literally, $61 in IRCs to back up his promises. Imagine finding out the magical pizza you thought you were eating was just cardboard. And worse, it wasn't even fancy cardboard. It was leftover shipping box cardboard. The whole thing came crashing down like a Jenga tower made out of over-leveraged loans. Ponzi was arrested for mail fraud because, ironically, it's illegal to scam people through the mail, and he went to prison for 3.5 years. But Ponzi wasn't done yet. He got out, tried his hand at some new scams because, old habits die hard, got arrested again, and spent another 9 years in the slammer. After that, the US kindly deported him back to Italy, which is basically like getting kicked out of the world's biggest carnival after riding all the rides without a ticket. Ponzi spent the rest of his life in poverty, a far cry from his golden-suited days, but at least he left behind one enduring legacy, the Ponzi scheme. To this day, when someone promises you unbelievable returns, just remember, they're probably pulling a Ponzi. Because, as it turns out, you can't actually get rich off postage stamps. Not even if you really, really believe you can. The end.